It's me. Oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in a clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Well, many of you are wondering if that dog barking in the intro is part of the intro. No, that's not. And hopefully the dog will get a milk bone or something and settle down, and that won't happen again. But welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and this is our live show, Podcast UFO. Happy New Year to everyone. We're back on regular schedule here, and glad to be. And I hope everyone has a great 2019. We have some really awesome shows lined up coming up, and I want to thank everyone that helps out with the show. And you can check out our website, podcastufo.com. All that information's over there. Occasionally we get blogs. We are looking for a blog. We've had a few people send some blogs our way. We are looking for more. I definitely get emails. I respond to some of my emails saying, are you interested in writing blogs? Because you just wrote me a 15-page email that I'll never read personally. I might have a voice-to-text thing read it for me. But anyway, I have a little bit of ADD going on. I cannot read those big, huge, humongous emails. But I do appreciate them anyway. And and if you would like to get in contact with me, all that information, the contact information is over at podcastufo.com. So we are live on YouTube and simulcast on KGRA Radio. And that's it for me. I'm going to get my guest, Alejandro Rojas. How are you, Alejandro?
I am good. How are you, my friend?
I'm great. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
And hey, this is the night that the History Channel is coming out with Project Blue Book.
Tonight's the night.
Just a few hours.
Yes.
Yeah.
So very exciting. I'm really bummed. I was invited, this is so cool, by Paul Hynek to go to his house and watch it tonight, but I just couldn't get out there. How amazing would that have been?
Jeez. Wow.
I know, to watch the premiere with the son of the guy who's in there. And I did mention, I talked to him about if he was one of the kids that's in the show, because in the show, Hynek and Mimi, his wife, are this young family, and they do have, I think, a kid and a baby so far in the show. Now, eventually he had several kids. But Paul, I guess, was not born, or he was a baby at the time when all of, at least what's portrayed in the show.
Is it Scott or Joel?
Huh?
Is it Scott or Joel that is portrayed in the show? I can't remember.
I can't remember.
I know those are the two older brothers.
Yeah, so that's probably both of them. That's probably the kid and the baby.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited about it, and it's. I think there's going to be. I had someone contact me saying, "Hey, we're going to get a bunch of UFO reports probably tomorrow in MUFON out in Chicago." Sam?
I think so. Yeah. This happens if they mention MUFON is what it comes down to, because people have to know that there's someone to report to. So there's Karen in the background there.
Yes, that's great.
And that's the issue, is that a lot of times people don't know who to report to. And we've talked about this before, but a lot of times people mention that sightings have dropped. I argue, and I think that the numbers show it, that it's not so much that people are seeing less, it's that during a period of time, while MUFON had their own television show, the sighting reporting skyrocketed because people knew where to report to. But now that show's gone, the replays are kind of, it's not being shown on replay very much anymore. People are forgetting or just not knowing where to report UFOs. And so as a field investigator, when I used to do that work for MUFON, we used to hear that all the time. I just didn't know where to report. And in fact, if you ask most people out there, did you report your UFO sighting? If they tell you about one, they'll say, I didn't know I could.
That's right. I got to tell you real quickly, I was at a bagel place in my new location, Rockland, Maine, up on the coast. and my lady friend with me was wearing a MUFON hat, and the guy behind the bagel counter said, "You know, I had a sighting," and he ended up telling me this amazing sighting. So amazing, you know, missing time, the whole works. That I'm inviting him over to the studio. I'm going to have him in one of the shows. But one of the craziest sightings I've ever heard in Maine, this guy had. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, Karen likes to do that. Who just walked behind me. She likes to wear UFO Congress sweaters or T-shirts. And sometimes we do get people coming up and asking, hey, you know, I had a sighting. Is you know, what's this all about? Or sharing their sighting.
But the same thing, like you just said, he couldn't think of where to report it, never reported it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I understand that, because that's when I had my sighting. I never thought about anything online. First of all, I don't know why, but it didn't occur to me in 2006. You know. Oh well.
Yeah, exactly. That's what happens with people. So that's what it has to be now. Luckily, you know, I was going to say, getting into UFO news, really, Project Blue Book is the big UFO news right now. There's not a lot, and there hasn't been in the last few weeks. It doesn't seem like a lot of UFO news. So, but there have been a lot of news stories, and they're all tied to Project Blue Book. So, which is really exciting, because it looks like, you know, if I look at some of these places that are writing, it's places like Live Science, GeekWire, Bustle, Hollywood Reporter. So these are all bigger. They're all writing stories. Here's the Yakima Herald.
I saw some on Den of Geek.
Yes, and I was going to mention that as well. Chicago Sun-Times. So there are a lot of media writing UFO stories because of the Project Blue Book show coming out, which is probably due to, you know, the great outreach that they did. They reached out to you and I. And you're right. I got to write a couple articles at Den of Geek, and I definitely would recommend them. And here's the angle I took. First of them, one of them's a preview, because you and I got to see the first couple of episodes. And so it's around this idea, you know, some people have been complaining that it's not exactly accurate. So I kind of tackle that, which is, it's true, but I tackle some of the points and how it's not accurate, but how some things, although maybe not fact by fact accurate, are accurate in the sense that they're kind of portraying an accurate setting, you know, the atmosphere, and how people, like the Air Force, there was no Captain Quinn like in the show, but Captain Quinn does very well at representing kind of this negativity and this kind of mystery, and is he trying to debunk everything because he thinks there's nothing to it, or is there something more behind this? And you know, you get that sense. And then Aidan Gillen, who you know, he in the show he comes in 1952, whereas in reality he joined the Air Force doing this in 1948. But the character that Aidan Gillen is portraying is kind of, you know, more open-minded than Hynek actually was in the beginning of his investigations in UFOs with the Air Force. And so you get this real sense of this pure kind of open-minded curiosity is what I called it in my preview. And I think that it's very endearing. And at least for me, and I think you said the same, you know, you're really attracted to, you really like this guy as the hero going through and trying to figure this stuff out.
Yes. Yeah, I think I like his portrayal of the character a lot better than Malarkey's portrayal of the captain. His is.
I like Malarkey's portrayal, but I want to hear why you don't like it.
I think it's, now this is my only criticism of the show, and it was brought up to me by someone else, and then I started thinking about it, and I watched the first six episodes, the screeners that I mentioned in the last show. I was very fortunate to be able to watch that. It's a little clunky. To me, it doesn't seem like really natural. You know, maybe I'm not.
Malarkey doesn't seem natural?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like the way he's just fluffing it off like it's nothing, and the interaction between him and Hynek, I didn't think was like a real connection. But by the sixth episode, I think it's a little more natural. But I noticed that in the first few.
See, and that's what I think is accurate about it. They're meeting for the first time. They're getting to know each other. Malarkey or Captain Quinn is tasked with kind of debunking everything and making sure that the scientist, you know, comes up with mundane conclusions, but he's not. So he's got to rein in this scientist. At the same time, his superiors are telling him, hey, you've got to shut this, any idea that there's any mystery here down. And so he's kind of in the middle. And I thought that was interesting, and I know that's going to evolve over time. But malarkey, and it's kind of funny, another comment someone did on the Open Minds UFO group on Facebook was that he didn't act cocky enough, and he acts very cocky.
I thought he was very cocky, yeah.
But this guy was saying that, Air Force pilots are extremely cocky. So
well,
he wasn't
that
cocky.
is a good point, because the pilots that I've known, they can be... yeah.
But my other article on Den of Geek is an interview with Malarkey, and what was really interesting was talking to him about, his thoughts on Blue Book and kind of how his research into his character and into Project Blue Book in particular, which is great. Him and the show writer, that David O'Leary, who we got to talk to, have read Ruppelt's book. And Captain Ruppelt, he was the guy who ran Blue Book for a period of time. And it's the most important book probably in ufology, estimate of the situation.
Right.
And they both read that book, and it was really eye-opening for Malarkey that to him, it proves that there is definitely something to the phenomena, that there is a cover-up, and that although he kind of feels for the Air Force, probably partially because he's playing this role in that, how are they supposed to handle this? It's a difficult thing to handle. So that's the other interview that I have out there. But a lot of people writing about UFOs kind of in their area, but a lot of news about how, there's real UFO research that used to go on. So that's the beauty of this program, even regardless of the drama or how we feel about kind of how the characters interact or other things, is that it's bringing awareness. In fact, I wrote in my article, even if it strayed from the truth dramatically, it's still entertaining. I think it would still bring awareness to the situation, but to Project Blue Book. But I think it's going to not be as bad as something people are fearful of.
Right.
As far as straying from the truth.
Hey, in a conversation I had with a ufologist a while ago, I was talking about Edward Ruppelt, and he said that at the end he decided there wasn't anything to the UFO phenomenon. Did you? Well,
what had happened is that he wrote his book, and in the end he was kind of on the fence. He was saying, could there possibly be something to this? And when you read about some of the cases, like Washington, D.C., or some of the other cases that he really goes over in detail, there's no answer. And he's saying that, we debunked all of the potential answers. So, for instance, in 1952, Washington, D.C., the General Sanford, he came out and said this was weather inversion. That's why they saw these things on radar. But they had already debunked that. They had already determined, no, that was not the case. So in the book, he's really arguing that there are many cases that were unsolved and mysterious. And so that was kind of the conclusion. Well, he came out with another volume soon after the book came out. And this one had this weird kind of conclusion where he's saying, however, I think that all of this stuff can be explained, even the ones we haven't been able to figure out. So there's probably nothing too mysterious to the whole UFO phenomena. So he was much stronger on the skeptical side in that second book or second update. The question is, why did he do that? What does he really feel? We don't know, because unfortunately he passed away at a young age.
Right.
Not too long after writing that second edition and just changing that end a bit. So we don't know how he really truly felt or why he, kind of changed things up there. It seems that there was certainly, at least anecdotally, a reaction that the Air Force wasn't happy that he had written this book, and that they had maybe influenced him, maybe just peer-to-peer, saying, hey, man, you're making us look good. Can you kind of fix that up a little bit? And he said, okay, and did it, for his buddies or something. But
yeah, we'll never know.
Yeah, we'll never know.
Yeah. Anything else going on, or is that about it?
No, the only other thing I wanted to talk about is this Roswell program. Real quick, if you don't mind.
Are you talking about the one Ryan Sprague? and you were involved in as well, right?
Yeah.
I was
so
actually thinking of
helped,
mentioning that. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. I helped produce this thing, so I helped them put it together and figure out some ideas how to do something for Roswell. Of course, Roswell is an old story, but so I worked with them the whole time. And actually, I suggested Ryan Sprague because I love Ryan Sprague. I suggested a whole list of people, but luckily they did choose someone, and they chose Ryan, who, of course, is great. So this is really fun. It was just going to be a piece that was going to go online, but they liked it so much that they are going to show it January 10th. That's Thursday. So look at your local listings. It'll be on CW. It's called Roswell Mysteries Decoded.
Right.
So I haven't even seen a final cut of it, so I'm going to see it along with the rest of you on Thursday. But it'll be online once it airs, and then I'll definitely be sharing that in social media and at OpenMinds.tv.
And this is perhaps a pilot for something that may or may not
be. So it's a UFO investigation, and I've been working with this production company for a while. They're into UFOs, and they want to do some serious UFO investigation type television programs. And so we've been shopping some stuff around, and CW did ask them, hey, we would like something on Roswell because they've got this new Roswell, New Mexico television show coming up, which is a reboot of kind of that high school romance drama Roswell television show. And so, so they wanted some update to the Roswell mystery, essentially, and that's what we put together. Like I said, it was going to just be online, but luckily they are going to be doing it on the air.
Excellent. All right, Alejandro. Hey, well, thanks so much. And we'll
thank
be talking
you.
Next week, right?
Yes, we'll talk next week, and I want to plug at least your appearance on my show. We did a 2018 year review.
Absolutely.
And that was posted today, and that was a lot of fun as usual.
Yes, I did mention that last week. So check out openminds.tv, and it's myself and the great Lee Spiegel and the great Alejandro Rojas talking about what happened in 2018, and I mispronounced a few words and got some...
Just a couple.
Yeah. All right, you have a good one.
All right, you too.
All right, talk to you next week.
See ya.
All right, everyone. So our guest tonight, we have Kyle Lovern, and he is a regional editor of the Williamson Daily News and Logan Banner in South Western Virginia, and he resides in Mingo County, and that borders eastern Kentucky. And he's been a longtime newspaper and radio journalist in his community and has won awards for newspaper columns, articles, and photos. And he's had a lifelong interest in the UFO phenomena. He actually had some things happen when he was young. He's a UFO researcher and historian, and he's published 2 books on the subject: Appalachian Case Study, UFO Sightings, Alien Encounters, and Unexplained Phenomena, Volumes 1 and 2. And they're available on Amazon. And that is who we have on tonight. And welcome to the show, Kyle.
Well, glad to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and I had a guest lined up for this week, and you were gracious enough, and then he had to reschedule, so you were gracious enough to agree to be on, and I really do appreciate that a lot.
Well, I'm glad I could be on your show. I hadn't been on a talk show in a while, so I'm glad to get back into the flow of things and talk about some UFOs. I was listening to you earlier. Like you said, I think the reports have been down a little the last few months, but I look for an uptake in 2019.
Yeah, I think that very well could be. It'll be interesting to see what happens. And so you are in what? Can you just kind of explain what the newspaper is, where that is, the coverage is of that in particular?
Yeah, I'm in southwestern West Virginia. We're like 80 miles south of our state capital of Charleston and 80 miles south of Huntington, where you probably heard of Marshall University. We're located in Mingo County. We border Pike County, Kentucky. If I'm at my office, I could go out and look, and I can see Kentucky, even though I'm from West Virginia. We're that close. So I grew up right here on the border of southern West Virginia, eastern Kentucky, right in the heart of Appalachia. The coal fields, it's nicknamed the heart of the billion-dollar coal field because of the coal mining industry. We're in the same area where the famous Hatfield-McCoy feud was fought.
Yeah.
I'm like 15 minutes away from that. A lot of history like that. Daniel Boone came through here. Some of the early history. So it's a pretty neat place. Small town, Williamson. It's got about a population of about 3,000-4,000. My sister newspaper, Logan Banner, about the same. Like I say, railroad, mining industry, tourism, fishing, ATVs, that kind of thing. Beautiful country, very sparsely populated once you get out of the rural of the city areas, if you want to call it a city. And it's a great little town. Grew up here, and there's definitely been some sightings in this region over the years too.
Yes, and you had mentioned to me, and I actually read a little bit where you've actually had some sightings. Do you want to talk about the sightings and how, is that how you got interested in the topic?
Yeah, that sort of spurred my interest. First sighting I can really remember, I was like 8 or 9 years old. I was sitting on the front porch in the summer evening with my parents and my sister. She's a little older than me. And it wasn't quite dark. It was late evening, very hot, humid summer evening. And as I say, we're right on the border. And we just happened to notice, looking at a mountain that was probably a couple hundred yards away from our home, 3 glowing discs that came over that mountain, and they just hovered there for, it seemed like 5 minutes, we were a little scared, also mesmerized, we watched those, and then they were gone in just a split second. Of course, at that time, this was in the mid-'60s. We didn't know who to report them to or who to talk to about it. Ironically, a couple of years ago, I was doing some research, and you mentioned Project Blue Book coming on tonight on the History Channel. There was a report that same evening to the original Project Blue Book that somebody saw something similar in Kentucky just a little ways, or probably an hour before we saw our sighting. So I thought that was sort of ironic. Yeah, I know. So that gave me proof that it did happen. Because I talked to my sister, and she doesn't really remember it. My parents have passed away now. But I know it happened. And I was, like I say, young. But as I got a little older, I still I was interested in the subject. Anytime I would see something on TV or read it in the newspaper, I would always want to, look into it. You had the 1973 flap or wave of sightings on the eastern coast of the United States. I was in high school at that time, and got really interested in it because you didn't hear much in mainstream media during that time about UFOs, but you were hearing about this because there were so many sightings. I mean, police officers were chasing UFOs, and
yes,
people were seeing them all over. If you've done your research, you've probably heard about it. So every evening I was going out looking, hoping to see something. And I just happened to be in the backyard with my neighbor, a friend of mine, and we looked up, and sure enough, we saw a UFO probably a couple hundred yards up above his backyard, over the mountain, treetop level, multicolored lights, round disc-shaped UFO. Again, we're mesmerized. We called for his mother. She came out and she saw it, and I'm sure other people saw it too. So, that was the last sighting I had until 2012. Ironically, I had published my first books, and one day I went out to lunch from work at the newspaper where I work, Williamson Daily News. I usually don't take that long, but that day I took a little longer because my wife had an appointment, and I took her to that. And then I come back in the office, and they're like, my coworkers like, "Where you been?" I said, "Well, I took a long lunch." They said, "Well, the phone's been ringing off the hooks. People are calling saying there's a UFO over this area." I thought they were joking because, I get a little ribbing from time to time on that. They said, "No, really, it's we've gotten calls, and they're asking for you." So I sit at my desk and said, "Wow, okay." Sure enough, the phone rings. It's another lady that calls from the west end of our town here in Williamson. She says, I know you're interested in this subject. You know, you've written the books. I'm looking at a UFO right now. And I was like, you got to be kidding. So I said, what part of the sky? She told me. So I go out, and right across the street from us is a automotive tire repair shop. All these guys are standing there. They're looking at the same UFO. I go across the street. Sure enough, I look. We see the UFO, which I sent you a picture of that earlier.
Oh, yes. I'll put
and
that
it
up.
Turned out,
yeah,
you can put that up. It turns out that there was probably hundreds of people that ended up seeing this UFO from the Pikeville and Virgie, Kentucky area of Pike County over here to the Williamson area, probably in about a 50-mile, 60-mile radius. Hundreds of people. My phone blew up that day and the next day of everybody that saw this UFO. So, that was my latest sighting, and that just was just amazing to see that, and the fact that there were so many other eyewitnesses to that case. And so that's a little bit of my background as far as my personal sightings. But where I did have the, as you say, the journalism background, I was working with another journalist who started a small publishing company a few years ago, and he had done a book about ghost sightings. So one day we're having lunch, and I said, what do you think about doing a book about UFOs? He's like, what do you mean? I said, well, I've been interested in that. I've got a few stories. I'd written for a magazine a few years ago, and I'd saved those. And he said, well, let me think about it. He did a little research, and they said, well, they say those books do pretty well. Let's try it. So he published my first book. It did really well. I said, well, hey, I've got enough to do another one. So we did volume 2, as you mentioned, the Appalachian Case Study, UFO Sightings, Alien Encounters, and Unexplained Phenomena, published by Woodland Press, a little small publishing company here in southern West Virginia. And so, then my name started getting out there. I started getting people contact me with other stories.
Yeah, that's what happens.
I'd go do book signings. People would come up, hey, I had a sighting, or my friend had a sighting, and it's amazing how many people come up. And like you said earlier, they just don't know where to report these, or who to call, or who to talk to. So you mentioned it to them about MUFON. I've got a Facebook page with a friend of mine that people can report UFO sightings in their neck of the woods. We can talk about that a little later.
Yeah.
But I'll shut up and let you ask some more questions.
Well, actually, we're ready to go to a break.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm on with Kyle Lovern. And this is Martin Willis and Podcast UFO. And we're live over at YouTube and KGRA Radio. And we'll be right back right after these messages.
You're clear.
All right. How many minutes we have?
You have 2 minutes. 3 minutes, sorry.
3. Got it. Okay. All right. So, Kyle, when you first let's talk. We have these 3 minutes to talk about. More or less another subject. We'll go back into talking more. But the first sighting that you had, you mentioned that these the 3 lights, I believe you said, and you said it disappeared. Do you mean when you said it disappeared? Do you mean that it took off really fast, or did you see him go out? Or can you explain how that happened?
Yeah, it just seemed like that they just disappeared. We're not sure if they just took off fast or they just disappeared. It was just like they were there 1 minute and the next second they were gone. So it wasn't like we saw them speed off.
Yeah. There's a lot of things sightings that I hear about that are either do take off really quickly or all of a sudden just vanish. And that includes people are seeing an actual structured craft, and they see it vanish, which is really fascinating to me in many ways. Let's see. Someone wanted to know in the chat room over there at YouTube. They wanted to know if the sighting that you saw. I'll bring up the picture again for the people on YouTube. That they wanted to know if it was cigar shaped. Would you consider that a cigar shape?
Yeah, probably in UFO lore, maybe cigar shape, but it was almost I described it as fluorescent lights, a couple of fluorescent lights.
That's what I remember. They're like almost like a light on each side, and then clear, transparent.
Exactly. Yeah, and what was amazing about it is that it stayed there for a long time. And then I've talked about this before. What I noticed is all of a sudden I started seeing these chemtrails come by, like jets were flying by. You
mean
somebody
contrails?
asked me, were they military jets? Yeah, and I said, well, I couldn't tell if they were military jets or not, but it was obviously something flying close by. And I went out to another area of the county that was higher elevation to try to get a better look. By the time I did that, it was gone. But we can talk about that too.
Now the elevation. I know we only have less than a minute left here. The elevation is so hard to tell, and especially the most contrails that people see are from 30 to 40,000 feet up.
Exactly.
Do you think this was up that high?
Excuse me. It was pretty high, yeah, I do. And there was an amateur astronomer, which I'll mention. His name's Alan Epling, a school teacher that got some video of it, and it's on YouTube. It's a really good video.
All right. Hang on a second, please. Eric, can you repeat that again? How many do we have left?
10 seconds.
10 seconds. Okay, we'll be ready.
All right. I'll count you down. In 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, welcome back. This is Martin Willis, and my guest is Kyle Lovern, and we're talking about, I say it wrong, I was always, my whole life I've been saying Appalachian, and it's Appalachia. Is that how you say that?
That's how we say it, Appalachia, yeah.
And because, as maybe a number of people don't realize this, but they actually start in Maine, where I live, and go all the way down to Georgia, I believe, right?
Yeah, Georgia and touch into Alabama, so it's a really long mountain range. West Virginia is the only state that's entirely in the Appalachian Mountain Range, but it touches on several states.
And where are they in regards to the Smoky Mountains when you get down in that area?
They are probably a part of that range, but the Smoky Mountains are more in the Tennessee area.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
Blue Ridge Mountains, Smoky Mountains, yeah.
Yeah. And so when you were looking into UFO sightings, did you look throughout the whole range? Because I know people hike, it's many people hike every single year, starting in Maine and ending up in Georgia. That's mostly how they go. I know some people go the other way, but some people hike the entire range, and it takes weeks and weeks and weeks to do. And I know that while they hike the range, they drop into all these little towns along the way and stuff like that. It's pretty interesting. But there's a lot of alone time involved and a lot of camping out under the stars. So are there known sightings that people have reported while they're hiking, doing that stretch?
I've talked to people that were out camping, at night, or that were out hunting. This is, of course, an area where there's a lot of hunters, and sometimes at night, and they have reported seeing UFOs. I've had several of those people that have talked to me about that. As I mentioned earlier, it's a sparsely populated area, so, where else would be a good place for UFOs if they didn't want to be detected to fly over those kind of an area,
Yeah.
Like Appalachian Mountains, just like out west in the desert area, Roswell, Area 51, and those places. And, I think there's been more sightings here than people realize. It's just people don't want to talk about it because of the stigma, especially in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, and you being a journalist, how was that received by colleagues and other newspapers as far as you actually interested in the subject?
It's gotten a little better. I'm sure some people still maybe snicker in the background or they don't believe, but times have changed. I think more people believe that there's something to the phenomena than they did years ago. With all you see the specials and the shows on the History Channel and National Geographic and Discovery that take it seriously. And then, you had the report that come out last year that the Pentagon admitted that they spent millions of dollars studying UFOs, and a lot of, we know we had Project Blue Book over the years. So there's people that aren't, they're coming forward now. They're not, you'd be surprised at the people that talk to me. They don't always want to use their name, or they don't want to necessarily go on record, but they do believe. And I was, you wonder if people take you seriously or not, but they do. I'll have a few people will ask me about it, but every once in a while you'll still get a joke here and there. But most people seem to be very interested in it and to take it serious.
Yeah, I definitely see kind of a warming trend in general as far as that goes. And I had mentioned earlier in the news that local guys started talking to me, and this actually happened while he was clearing trails and camping out at night and things like that. So that does seem, perhaps it's that people are camping out in the wild that seem to have a lot of sightings, because there is a time when you're actually outside and you're aware of the environment. You're not looking at your iPhone when you're camping and whatever. So, perhaps that's why there's so many of them seen while people are hiking and camping and,
Well, you've got a better view of the sky, too, because you don't have the light pollution that you do in the city. Here you see the stars, you're out, there's not many street lights, or, it's pretty dark when you get out here in some of these locations, and, on a clear night you can have a really good view.
That's right.
And if there's something that comes over, you're going to see it.
Well, before we went into the break, we were talking about, I believe it was 2012, is that when that sighting happened?
Yeah, October 16th, 2012.
Yeah. I do actually remember that, and I believe I actually may have talked about that on the show when that happened. And there has been very similar objects, I guess that's the way I'll put it, that have been seen very similar to that. And if I recall, there was one, I want to say in Mexico, that looked very much like that, and it actually dropped down these little light orbs. Are you familiar with that?
I do know that there's been similar sightings of this sort of a cylindrical, I call it fluorescent-looking UFO. And even at this time, like about a week apart, there was, I think, sightings in Pennsylvania and maybe in Tennessee that were similar to this.
And was there a speculation of it being, I know that it stayed like hours, I believe, a few hours, right? In one location, more or less?
Yeah, it seemed like it was, hovering in the same location for at least, that I know of, an hour, maybe a couple hours. And, what I also noticed as I continued to look at it, because I was at work and I had a camera, but it didn't have a really great lens on it, so I was able to get a couple pictures. But I called my wife, because I have binoculars here, and I told her to get the binoculars to go out on the back deck, and told her where to look. And she did, and she's the first one that told me that it looked, long, elongated, cylindrical, because my view wasn't as good, from where I was. I didn't have binoculars or a long lens. And then there was a amateur astronomer from over in Kentucky. He's I think a biology science teacher, high school teacher, and he was able to video it through his telescope and got some really good video of it. And that's where you can see it up close and see what the shape was. And that's on YouTube. If anybody wants to look it up, they can view that, and it's amazing to look at it.
Right. And was there speculation that it could have been a balloon?
Somebody said that. Of course, I take it just like they said UFOs were swamp gas or the planet Mars or whatever in the 60s. There's no way it was a balloon. And then somebody said something that had something to do with an internet device, or I don't know. It was some crazy.
The Google. Google was experimenting with internet through balloons.
Yeah.
But they were normal. They were like weather balloons, similar to weather balloons.
They were round,
right.
Looked like weather balloons. This looked nothing like that.
And they were really high in the atmosphere. I think they were above 100,000 feet or something like that as well.
Yeah. So there's no way that this was that.
Well, the reason I brought that up, the image that the astronomer took, it almost looks like a balloon, but it didn't have the characteristics of a balloon. as far as having the lights inside of it like that, and also that it just stayed stationary because you have wind currents.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
And you get up
And
high
this
enough, you get
stays
into the
stationary
jet
for a long
stream.
Yeah, exactly. No way a balloon's going to stay hovering in one spot for that long a time. So, you got to rule out the balloon. I think MUFON investigated it, and they came back with that it was a UFO, an unidentified flying object. They said it wasn't a balloon. They weren't quite sure what it was, but, it was a good UFO sighting. And, again, you had hundreds of witnesses.
And how long did did this go on as far as like in the news? Was it kept alive for a little while and people still talking about it?
Yeah, for about a week. I reported on it in my newspaper. There was a newspaper in Pikeville, Kentucky. Some of the local TV stations in the region reported on it, and it made a little bit of national news. I know I was on one talk show. I can't remember where it was. I think it was out of Boston, Massachusetts, talking about it. So, yeah, for a week or two, and then it sort of died down like usual. But, I still think as far as a more recent sighting in this area, it was one of the best that I've seen.
I believe I saw an image online of this sighting, and that image, it appeared to be vertical. Is that the way it looked to you when you stepped out of the newspaper where you worked and looked?
Well, again, like I say, it was so high up. Yeah, it definitely did. I wish I'd had my binoculars with me, but it definitely looked, sort of vertical and just a little bit of movement. And like I say, it almost had a light, fluorescent-looking appearance to it. It was just it was a very unusual UFO from what you usually see or hear about, with, of course, disc-shaped or triangular-shaped.
Right.
But, there have been the cigar-shaped, as a lot of people describe them in the past, of some of those kind of sightings.
Now, this lasted for so long. Did you, I've heard of a number of people said that, they've had real long sightings and they get bored. Did you get bored, or did you stay there the whole time and wait for?
Well, I actually had to go back to work because I had some things I had to do. So I went back to work to try to get some work done. But after that, I got off. Like I say, it was still there. I drove up to a higher elevation. We've got an area called the King Cole Highway, which is a lot higher up. And I drove up there to where, it was probably southeast from where we were located. And by the time I got there, I could no longer see it. I did notice it looked like a lot of jets flew by in the same area, the chemtrails or contrails. I don't know if they had anything to do with it, but I was thinking maybe they were military jets checking it out, wondering what it was, because it had to show up on radar. And, of course, there's nothing I can prove, but definitely you saw a lot of jets flying by in that same area.
Did the amateur astronomer, I know he filmed it, and I do believe I may have looked at it, way back when or whatever, but did the thing rotate at all, or did it just stay at one, it's steady?
It seemed to have a little bit of movement, but it was more steady for a long time, in one spot.
Yeah.
Which, again, a balloon's not going to do that. Plane's not going to do that.
Right.
Or a helicopter, no noise. Of course, like I say, it was pretty high up, but she couldn't detect any noise. But
yeah. Well, yeah, that was, like I said, I do remember when that happened. I was actually doing the show. I was in the first year of the show, and that was big news at the time. And
at the time.
Yeah. And has this reoccurred? A lot of times you hear about UFOs, reoccurring. Did it show up again, or is that it?
Not that I know of.
Yeah.
Not heard any more. If it has, I haven't heard about it, and I think I would have, since I pretty much know a lot about what's going on in this region with anything news-wise, especially within the UFO realm.
Right. All right. So let's talk about some of the other cases that you have in your two books that you can talk about. Some of the interesting ones.
Okay. Well, one of the first ones I wrote about, this guy, I got to know him, and actually became a friend of mine. He was a postman at a small post office out in a rural area that I was living at the time. And we just became friends. We started talking. The more we talked, I told him about my interest in UFOs, and I could see him perk up and maybe wanted to talk about it. And eventually he started feeling comfortable where he shared a couple of stories that he had. One was he was about 18 years old in high school. He went out hunting, as we were talking again, in a rural area up a little hollow road. And he said as he was walking along, he just heard a noise, sounded like leaves blowing. And he said he looked up, and right above him he saw this triangular-looking shaped UFO. He described it. I thought this was pretty cool. You remember the Norelco razor commercial?
Yep.
Yeah,
with the three razors.
The three,
heads?
yeah. 3 razors, 3 heads. That's how he described it. I always thought that was a pretty good description. And he said he just watched it for a while. He said, I had my shotgun. I thought about, should I shoot it or just, and then, of course, it just whooshed off. It took off and was gone in an instant.
Wow.
Soon after that, this was in the late 60s, he was drafted into the Army, went to Vietnam, served his time, came back, got a job with the post office. He got a job in Huntington, West Virginia, post office, and he lived about 60 miles away, so he had to get up pretty early in the morning to get to work. So he said one morning he got up, and he was driving down this rural road toward work, and his radio started acting funny, his car lights started going off, and his car just stalled, which, of course, you've heard UFO reports like this before. He said he looked over to the left, and he saw what he thought was maybe a brush fire, but it was just a bright light. And that's the last thing he could remember. He said the next thing he knows, he's at work, he's punching in, and he looks, and he's got like 2 hours of missing time.
Wow.
So, you've heard of people, I know. And I would have loved to be able to get into his memory to see what happened during that time. But again, it was, I just thought that was always a good story, because this guy was, he, like I say, was in the Army, served in Vietnam, had no reason to tell a lie or anything. He really believed that you could tell with his story, because most people, when they get to know you, they realize you are a believer, they feel comfortable opening up, and they start telling you their story.
Yeah.
And that's one of my favorites, one of my first ones that I wrote about, actually. It's in my first book. It's a first chapter.
Yeah, the triangle is something else, and that, being 1960 is fairly early,
Exactly.
Dave Marlowe will tell you that. You do hear about him, but not so often. There are a few in the 70s, and then now it seems like that's the majority of what people are seeing is the triangles.
Yeah, it does. But that was probably around 69, so it was the first one that I know that was triangular shaped during that period of time. And like you said, most of the time it was disc shapes during that time, or flying saucers.
Yeah,
as people would call them.
Yeah. Did he mention a couple of things? Did he mention sound or lights or anything?
Just like a bright light on the second one. On the first one, he said it was not very loud, but it was making maybe a whooshing sound, or he said it was more like it was blowing the leaves, because it was treetop, just above the treetops. He felt like it was blowing the treetops with the leaves on that, and that's the kind of you would hear, because this was in the fall of the year too, so a lot of the leaves were dry, and on the first triangular shape, so
wow,
pretty neat.
Yeah. And you've looked into some of the ones that I know that is it the Flatwoods Monster?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that's even going to be featured on Project Blue Book.
It is, yes.
Episode on the History Channel. I saw that on the previews.
I think it's a
second. Yeah, I did look into that.
Show. Uh-huh.
Second one,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a real interesting case. What I think is great about this was one of the earlier UFO sightings that received national press and national attention. It was 1952. It was October again. It seems like there's a lot of sightings in the fall of the year. But there was some young boys. They were playing football out in their yard in the evening after school. There was a couple of brothers, Freddie and Edward May, and a couple of the neighbor kids, and they saw something flash across the sky above them. They thought it was like a meteor. It wasn't too far from their home. It looked like it possibly landed near a farm, a hillside farm, close to where they lived in Braxton County, West Virginia. It's close to a town called Flatwoods, so that's why it's known as the Flatwoods Monster. The only reason I think it became the Flatwoods Monster because nobody really knew what UFOs were much at that time. Probably the only thing you'd heard of at that time was Roswell, and a lot of people hadn't heard about that at the time because that was just, late 40s.
Mm-hmm.
So they went and told the mother, and she got a flashlight. They decided to go up on the hill to look for this meteor. At least that's what they thought, or to see what this light was, where they thought it looked like it landed. So they made their way up this path and this little road above the farm, and when they got up there, they saw this huge 10 to 12 foot object with lights. They called, I think the people that talked to them at the time, the journalists, didn't know what else to call it. They thought it had like arms, like claws, but I think what it was, I really believe this might have been a smaller craft from a larger UFO that maybe was sent down to, this is my version anyway, to take soil samples and so forth. But they, of course, saw it. They got scared. They actually smelled a really weird, horrible odor emitting from this this UFO or small craft.
That's one thing I've never heard, that part of it.
Yeah. Oh, it's a fact. And they took off, ran back down the hill. They notified the local sheriff. The next day, the National Guard comes in, and they go up there. They found an area that was burnt, some burnt wood and a fence. They also looked like the ground was disturbed. And these boys and the mother, they also got sick.
Right.
They were throwing up, whether it was radiation or just from the smell, whatever this craft was. The mother was Kathleen May, and one of the brothers, they went and appeared on a national TV show, which is real rare for that time, and it became known as the Flatwoods Monster. But I think it was really part of a UFO. And again, I think you mentioned this earlier, 1952 was the same, this is around the same time as the sightings in Washington, D.C.
That's right.
Where you had that famous picture over the UFOs over the Capitol, around the same era, in the same time. And if you think about it, West Virginia is not very far from Washington, D.C. I always thought there was a little connection there. So, I actually got to meet one of the brothers at a UFO convention in Charleston a few years ago. He was one of the last living eyewitnesses of this. Stand-up guy, salt-of-the-earth kind of guy. And, he still stood by it. He said they saw something. He said, I don't know what it was, but it happened. We saw it, and it's a pretty cool story, and one of the first well-known stories in the United States, really.
What do you think about the Project's Blue Book answer that was an owl on top of a tree?
Again, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
What I just described to you, these people actually physically got sick. There was large indentations, I guess you would say, in the ground. There was burnt wood where they saw this object. And they actually said that, somebody I talked to, that the National Guard was supposed to take soil samples and so forth from that and end up sending it to wherever, Washington or wherever. So an owl doesn't do that. I mean, come on. Again, some of these early explanations of, I guess.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking about the chaotic scene that it was. I don't think an owl's going to hang out there either.
Exactly. Yeah, and what they saw was owls get pretty big. They're pretty big birds, but not as big as they described this, and flashing lights. I mean, and this was, again, multiple witnesses, and they were physically sick from the odor that they smelled that was emitting from this UFO. So, you know, you can Google it. There's different versions, different stories, but it's definitely an interesting case, probably an unsolved case. But like I say, the Army National Guard was there. The sheriff came the next day, and I'd heard there were some other sightings in that area at the same time that just never got reported.
But did they ever pick up anything, you know, like any type of meteor element or anything like that there that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, but like I said, I'd heard that they did take some soil samples and maybe some of the burnt wood and turned it over to whoever military. I guess they took it, and that's the last you hear of it. You heard so much during that time, the 60s, even Project Blue Book, when they came out, if they took soil samples or whatever, you never heard any results from anything like that. And then they would come back and just say, oh, yeah, it was a large bird, or it was swamp gas, or, you know, it was your imagination, or you just saw the moon coming down over the hill and you thought it was a UFO, you know.
Well, we have 1 minute until we take the break. And
okay.
You mentioned that you spoke to a witness. Was he one of the ones that actually got sick?
Yeah.
He was.
Yeah.
And did he talk about his health after that?
He never really had any health problems, but, you know, they did get sick, and they stayed sick for a little while, about a week or so, you know, throwing up and so forth.
And do you know if did they get checked for radiation poisoning?
I doubt if they did at that time. Again, this was 1952, a rural area. Nobody sent them anywhere to check for radiation poisoning or anything like that. They may have went to a local doctor. Other than that, yeah, I'm sure if that happened now, it would be a lot different.
Yeah.
If you're talking many years ago.
Right. Well, it's time for us to go into break. So this is Martin Willis with Podcast UFO. My guest tonight is Kyle Lovern. And we'll be right back right after these messages.
Clear, you got 3 minutes.
All right, thank you. All right, so Kyle, during this break, I'm going to look for questions in the chat room, and I saw one.
Great.
Up here just a minute ago. And so something happened in the coal fields of Kentucky, and I'm just looking for there's a lot of
There was a case that didn't happen. Let's see. I'll have to look it up here in my notes about a UFO hitting a train.
That's it. Yes, I just found the question. So it's David.
That's interesting.
Yeah, David wanted to know about that. In Kentucky, it hit a freight train, and 2 other UFOs over a river. Or something like that, but in the 3 minutes that we have, or actually 2 minutes left, we probably only have time to talk about that one. Do you know anything about that case in particular, where there was a collision?
I did some research. Actually, went over to where I think it happened, but we can't get anybody to go on record that worked on the railroad. But you know, I think something definitely happened. I can talk a little bit about it. I mean, from the reports I've seen with doing my research, but I think as they say, where there's smoke, there's fire. It seems like something happened in that situation. I noticed there was a piece on one of the UFO cover-up episodes on the History Channel about it the other night.
So, and something like that, I mean,
somebody to come forward.
That's such an odd thing where a UFO would crash into a train or a train into a UFO. I mean, it's so bizarre.
Yeah, it is bizarre, and it's almost unbelievable. But I just feel like something must have happened. I mean, it didn't crash to like where it did Roswell, where it was into pieces or whatever. I think the train engine and a couple of the coal cars behind it received some damage, reportedly. And but you can't, I was at one book signing, and I had a guy come up to me that said he worked for that railroad It's the CSX Railroad. And then he knew somebody that was working at that time, but they wouldn't talk about it. It's like they were told to keep quiet, sworn to secrecy, one of those kind of deals.
30 seconds, boys. Sorry to cut it.
Yep. Okay. All right. So, it seems like that would be a really good trace evidence case right there.
Exactly. I wish I would have known about it at the time, but when I went over, it was a few years later. We were just trying to find the area where we thought it happened, myself and a guy named Thomas Fugit.
Okay. I think we're going back, aren't
UFO
we? Yeah.
Yeah, you guys ready?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, I'll count you down. In 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, welcome back. This is Martin Willis, and my guest tonight is Kyle Lovern, and we're talking UFOs as usual. Appalachian, I'm going to get the right way to pronounce that sooner or later. UFOs in particular, and the lines are open. We are available to take calls now. That's up on the screen for the people on YouTube. If you're over at KGRA Radio, that phone number is 603-967-4030. And you're welcome to call in and ask our guests some questions. During the break, for the people that didn't hear this on the radio station, we're talking about a possible UFO collision with the train. And the person that asked that said, how about there were 2 UFOs over a river. Are you familiar with that particular story, Kyle?
Yeah, I wrote about it in my second book. I didn't get to talk to any first-hand witnesses. I did some research on it, some reports that were made. I went to the area a few years later trying to find the area where I thought that it occurred. It's near a town called Painesville, Kentucky, and in eastern Kentucky. It's railroad tracks that mostly these trains carry or haul coal cars. It's a CSX railroad. And there were reports in 2002 in this real remote area that a train was coming around a bend middle of the night, probably like 2 o'clock in the morning. They saw this bright light. The tracks, on one side of the tracks you have a river, and on the other side you have a road. So the tracks is in the middle. And they saw this bright light. They thought it was another train coming. But then they saw that there were 2 or 3 disc-shaped objects floating over the river. But as they continued around the bend, they noticed one of the lights was right above them along the railroad tracks, and supposedly it glanced and hit the engine, one of the engines, and then off of a couple of the coal cars behind the engine, and there was some damage to those. The engineers and the conductor radioed their dispatchers, told them what happened. They told them to ask them if the train was still running, because the train was acting weird. It was computerized at that time. But they were able to get the train running, and they limped back into a station that wasn't used anymore, a small railroad yard. And by the time they got there, supposedly there was all these officials, and they took them away and questioned them for hours and asked them what happened, and that they were inspecting the engine and the railroad cars. And of course they were told not to talk about it, or they would lose their job, or worse. I can't confirm it, but it's a story that it's been all over the internet over the last few years, and it's pretty far-fetched, but at the same time it's believable. I would love to find somebody, an eyewitness, maybe one of the railroad workers that were working at that time, to come forward and talk. But no one has done that at this time. A friend of mine, Thomas Fugit, and I have tried to find some witnesses over in that area that maybe saw something or would come forward and talk about it, or if they've even witnessed other UFOs in that area. And we're still looking into that.
Wow, yeah. I've always wondered in situations like this, like it seems like occasionally I mean, not occasionally. Most people do not keep the same job forever, and when they're told to keep quiet or they'll lose their job or something like that, maybe a couple of years later they move on to something else, and at that point, why aren't they talking about it? I mean, they can't be threatened.
Well, you always heard of the men in black, or the government workers threatening, if you talk about this, bad things are going to happen. That's one theory, that it was not just railroad people there waiting on them, that it was government officials, and they told them to never talk about it. Do not talk about this or else. Again, that's one of the theories. I'm not sure, but it makes you wonder.
Have there been any Men in Black type situations reported? Has anyone talked about that in that area? I've not personally
had any Men in Black stories. There was some in the 1960s. You've heard about the Mothman.
Yes.
That occurred in Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
Right.
Now, that's one of the first times that anybody ever really heard about the Men in Black showing up, and there was supposedly sightings and people who had contact with Men in Black during that time in the mid-60s with the Mothman sightings. But I've never personally had anybody tell me they were approached by anybody like that. But,
Speaking of Mothman, and are there other like weird sightings like that are happening? Anything like that in particular? I mean, do you listen to all the different things that happen, not just UFOs? Like
people will tell you Bigfoot stories. They'll tell you ghost stories. Occasionally, and you might hear my dog barking in the background. Occasionally, you'll hear something about a Bigfoot sighting or a Mothman sighting. You just wonder how much of that is true. It's interesting. I can't. I've never really been 100% a believer on the Mothman. I think something happened. I think people had some incidents that happened. They saw something. Not sure what they saw, but it's a pretty interesting story. And again, that made national attention. Of course, there's been movies made about it. And again, in this area, you have Bigfoot sightings. And I saw something on the news the other day where a lady over not far from here in eastern Kentucky had a Bigfoot sighting one night. So out in the mountainous areas, you're going to have those. There have been a lot of Bigfoot sightings in Pennsylvania, even parts of Ohio, Virginia, West Virginia, Tennessee, in these areas. With all the mountainous areas we have, that's bound to happen. But
right.
there's been some. There was the one case I wrote about. It was in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, a few years ago. That was also in the 50s, where these people live on a farm that saw the little goblin aliens. Yeah. That's pretty interesting. And we've heard recently, and I was sent a documentary on, and I haven't actually got a chance to watch it yet, where not far from here, Pike County, again, there was another little community that some people reported seeing similar kinds of creatures near an old mine site, a coal mining site. Of course, they go underground. That these creatures are coming out from under inside the mine. Again, that's something I need to look into. Don't know much about it, but it's interesting and something to definitely piques your interest.
Yeah, is it called Hopkinsville? Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a good case.
Oh my goodness.
Story.
Yeah,
you've heard that. I'm sure.
I have, but for the person that's just starting to listen to the show that may not be familiar with it, do you know enough about it to talk about the family and the night? Yeah.
Let me try to find that chapter in the book.
Oh, you wrote about it? Okay. I mean, they were on the roof. They were shooting at them.
Yeah, they were shooting at them. They.
And
it was a pretty wild story.
And they did see them as, I think they described them like gremlins or something, right? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. But through history, people have described aliens or different. Every culture they have goblins or leprechauns or trolls. Every culture describes these things differently. This happened in 1955. It was in August. It was a summer night in a little farm near Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And there was a gentleman named Billy Ray Taylor, and I guess he stepped out of the farm and walked out into the yard to get some water from the well, and he noticed a small creature around the farm. He ran back into the house to tell his wife and some other folks that were there, and the dogs were outside. They started barking loudly, and of course they grabbed their rifles because they were scared. They didn't know what these things were, and they said they had large eyes, short legs, long arms, similar maybe to the grays, but maybe a little more scarier. But of course, again, you're talking 1955. They wouldn't know what a gray was at that time. It was they were just calling it a goblin or whatever. But they actually said these creatures were coming, and they were on the roof of the house and all surrounded them, and they actually shot at them. And I guess they were terrorized for a while that night, and it's a pretty interesting story. I know again, I got in wrote about it in my second book. It's pretty interesting to get into a little more details, but it's definitely one of the UFO or alien story that's interesting from that time period.
I'm really surprised that no one's made a movie of it. Like they always say, based on a true story. I mean, it seems like that would make a really great, scary movie, actually. Yeah, I know no one was killed. Of course, in the movie they'd have to kill someone.
Oh yeah, that's sensationalize it, But it would probably make a good movie. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine if the account is really true on what they went through, and how scared they must have been. And I believe wasn't one of the dogs injured or something?
I think I think so.
But I mean, just that whole the traumatizing situation. I can't.
Oh yeah. I mean, you can imagine even this day and age if that happened. You're out in a rural farmhouse. You're the only house around for miles, and if something like that happened, it'd be, like you say, traumatizing or terrorizing. But back in 1955, it would probably be even more.
Yeah. All right. So what about, by the way, the lines are open. And if anyone wants to call in again, that number is 603-967-4030. And what about some of the other interesting cases in either one of your books?
Okay. There's a couple I wanted to talk about that I thought were very interesting. Especially when they have multiple witnesses, I think that's always good.
Those are always good, yes.
Yeah, and this comes from an area that only probably about 15 miles from where I live. You're familiar? There's different kinds of mining. You've got the deep mining where they go underground to mine the coal, and then they've got something they've come up with the last few years called mountaintop removal mining, where they blast off the top of the mountain to get to the coal. I'd heard rumblings of this years ago, and then through my interviews with a lady talking about a sighting she had, she said, you really need to talk to my cousin. His name is Lloyd Mills, and I'd heard of him, and he lives fairly close to where I do. She said, he's got a great story, and it came from his work area, and he wasn't the only one that saw it. So I got a hold of him, and he agreed to talk to me and shared his story. He was, again, a Navy veteran during the Vietnam era, but he was working in a community out in rural Mingo County. It was a mountaintop removal site where they were mining coal, and it was the third shift, so it was at night. And they're out there. They have different areas of the project that they're working on when they're doing the coal, and they have to, of course, communicate with walkie-talkie or by radio with the big equipment and trucks that they use. But he was the night shift supervisor, and they were working. It was in September, so it was getting close to fall, early September, and it was real clear that night, he said, and probably had about 20 employees on both sides of the mountain, and he said one employee was running a large bulldozer, and he called over the CB radio and said, "What are those two lights coming down the hollow?" And he said he looked up, and it looked like two big headlights floating right down between the mountains where they were working. And these lights began shining down on the workers and the equipment, and as they squeezed down, through the valley there between the mountains. And so you had about 40 miners that were working, two different crews there, and they all saw this craft, this UFO. I mean, they were freaking out. They were all stopped working, of course. They start looking at this. They're watching it for several minutes. There were some guys over in another section that were by themselves. They called over and said there was lights over top of them. They're scared, like, what's going on here? And it's like they were almost being, they were beaming the light down like they were checking out what these guys were doing with the coal mining operation. And they said, it's pretty unsettling, but they had vivid memories of this happening, and had a couple other guys that worked there on that same operation that came forward and said, yeah, it really happened, but we were told by our superiors not to talk about it. They said at that time they were even contacted by the newspaper, but they didn't talk about it. They were told, if you talk about it, you'll lose your job, so clam it up. We don't want anybody coming around this property or coming around our operation talking about UFOs. But, I think it's pretty neat when you have that many witnesses that see the same thing. It's not like one or two guys out, fishing on a river that see it. You got multiple witnesses, and to me that tends to make you think something happened.
It's funny you're mentioning the fact that they were told not to talk about it and why they were told not to talk about it. And, sometimes I think, why is that? Why aren't they supposed to talk about it? And so from the standpoint of the employer, he doesn't want people, coming around, right, newspaper reporters or reporters coming in and, to talk about it. And a really good example of that is Calvin Parker. When the news got out about the Pascagoula incident, he had to actually, his boss actually told him, go away, go away for a couple of weeks till this dies down.
Yeah.
So I get it, but the part I don't get is don't talk about it ever. That doesn't make any sense, because after something blows over, why can't you talk about it?
Well, that's why I think that Mr. Mills finally talked. When I called him, he's retired now. He said, yeah, I'll talk about it because it happened. He said, and he goes to church. He's a God-fearing man. He said, I don't care. I'll tell anybody that it happened. We saw it. I don't know what they were, but they were strange objects. They were floating around. They were beaming lights down, and it did happen. And he came forward and talked about it. But like I said, I talked to a couple of the other guys, and they still didn't want to talk about it. I think more because they were scared when it happened, not the fact that they were going to lose their jobs 20-some years later.
Yeah.
So, but like you said, yeah. And I talked to a couple other guys that worked in this same area, and it was pretty remote, some of these mining, and they said as they left that area, many times they saw some strange lights in the same area. One of those was a pastor. He said, I'm leaving late at night and I'm watching this UFO. He said, I just pull over and watch it. It's real close. It's going all over across the sky. And, again, they had no reason to make up stories. These people, they just want to share and tell everybody what they saw. And they're tired of keeping quiet.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you mentioned that, the other witnesses to that sighting, didn't want to talk about it because they were more or less spooked about the situation. And that is something you do hear a lot, that, some people just don't they want to just forget it ever happened and don't even want to talk about it again.
Exactly. Yeah, it really, like you say, it spooks them, it scares them, and they just want to out of sight, out of mind, but sometimes eventually they come around and they'll talk about it, but most of the time, it scares them, and it is a sort of scary situation. I mean, I've talked to several people that still have, when they tell their story, you can just see they're uneasy to talk about it.
Yeah, and when you had your sightings, it sounds like 3 sightings you may have had total?
Yeah.
Were you scared during any of those?
Only when I was really young. The first one, when I was 8, 9 years old, really scared because I was just a kid, and you're talking the mid-'60s, and you're talking the shows we had on TV were The Outer Limits and The Twilight Zone. So, if you remember, they always make those aliens sort of scary. So,
yeah.
My sister and I were both a little spooked at that time, but I was still curious. And but no, later on when I was a teenager, I wasn't really scared. I was more amazed. I was just a little uneasy, but I was just fascinated, mesmerized. And of course, now as an adult, and the one I saw here a few years ago in 2012 with so many others, I was just so happy to be able to have another sighting after all these years, because I'm always looking up, hoping to see something again. They always say, be careful what you ask for, but
yeah.
Hey, I want to see them, I want to know. I told Stan Friedman, of course you know him, and I got to interview him and meet him a few years ago. I said, I feel like I'm the guy, Richard Dreyfuss' character on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I just got to know. I want to go and find out what's really going on. I need to know the truth.
Yeah. I think that I was a lot like what you said earlier. I was kind of mesmerized and amazed and everything on my one really good sighting that I had. I wasn't afraid, but I'll tell you what, if that thing turned around and came, back or made some type of threatening motion in any type of way, or that it was going to land or something like that, that would be a whole different story. But just seeing it where it was no threat at all, it was just mesmerizing and, amazing, and that was plain it. But, you mentioned something really kind of important, and that is you're always looking. I bet a lot of people that listen to the show are always looking too. And that is not the common person, though, and a lot of people never even consider it. Some people don't even look up at the stars. I understand that, but that's something I've always done. And
yeah, I think once you see something, you're always sort of more alert.
Yeah.
My wife says you're definitely a reporter, because you're always observing things and noticing things and asking questions, and I guess she's right. Got that intuitive personality, but I'm always looking up. I walk my dog at night. I'm always looking up, hoping to see something. Looking at every light that's blinking, or satellite or whatever it's going over. But a lot of people, that's what one guy told me. He said, how many people actually look up? He said,
that's right.
They probably don't. They don't even think about it, because they're just busy, or driving down the road, or whatever, and they don't even think about it. But unless it sort of hits them right in the face.
Right.
So
it's
true.
like,
but people need to be more aware.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, the dog walkers and the cigarette smokers, they say, are the people that see the most sightings. And I've never smoked, but I definitely have a dog. But in my sighting was in the hot tub, and I saw not just a UFO, over the years, many years in a hot tub. You see I saw an amazing fireball once, and you see some many satellites.
Oh, yeah.
And matter of fact, I see more satellites now than I ever saw. And
because you're looking up.
Yeah, yeah.
And there are more satellites, yeah. It's funny you said it. One of the other stories I had in one of my books, there was a guy that was in a hot tub and had a sighting.
Oh, really?
And that same night, he said, he had the sighting, and he's watching the news that night, and it was actually reported on the local TV news that several people had saw the same thing that he did. Again, I always think it's good when you have multiple sightings and and multiple reports, and it does make the news. I thought I'd share another story with you.
Sure, yeah.
This one happened in Rowan County, Kentucky, in a town called Moorhead. There's a college there, Moorhead University. And the guy that I actually got to talk to a little bit was a college professor at the school. And he was coming home one night, he said, and he was with his sons, and as they were pulling up in the driveway, they saw a strange light not far from where they were. And they ran into the house and went up to the second floor to try to get a better view. And a little later on, they heard a woman screaming. And next thing you know, there are police and firemen showing up because people had heard, they'd got the reports of the UFO, and then they got reports of a woman screaming. So they come out and they're investigating, trying to find where these screams are coming from and where this woman is coming from. And so you had definitely 911 reports because they had several calls about the UFO and a woman screaming. And again, this was in the evening, about between 9 and 10 o'clock in the summer months. And but the more I talked to the witness, he just decided he just didn't want to talk about it. Again, I think he was spooked. And at the same time, when you've got a job and that kind of profession, you probably start thinking, well, maybe I better not talk too much about this. I don't want the publicity. There's still the stigma and the stereotype. It's not as much as it used to be, but it's still there. So sometimes it's really hard to get people to talk. Or if they will talk to you, they don't want you to use their name. Use a fake name or whatever. And I hate that because, you really want to lend the credibility to the stories.
Yeah, I've never been too much for someone that wants to remain anonymous. I think I've had one show only where someone wanted me to just use their first name only, and
right.
But I think that's it. And I've watched a few documentaries or a few interviews with people that want to remain anonymous, and I don't think it holds a lot of salt, really.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem to be as credible. And sometimes I can understand, like I say, if they have a certain job or whatever reason, but I'd rather them use their real name and not, want me to use an alias. But I have done it if the story was good enough.
Yeah.
And I believed them. And you can usually, you can weed through it. If you've been in the business long enough, you can tell who's really got good stories and those that are maybe a little out there. You can just tell. You get that feeling. I always have that sixth sense I feel when I'm talking to people. You can tell whether they're true or not.
The third book that you've written, did these stories, you mentioned, when you were doing a book signing, people talk to you and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is that how that came together? Like people have read your other books and sent you more stories, or how did that come about?
Yeah, most of the stories in that one did come about where once the word got out and I did book signings and people started reading the books, people started contacting me and sharing stories with me, and it's sort of amazing once, how that happens. There was I've never had a book signing or an appearance where I didn't have somebody come up and not share a story with me, usually multiple times. And again, good, credible people that in all walks of life, different professions, some were even military, some were first responders, just real good, upstanding citizens. And they were some really good stories. I think more people have had sightings than we realize, but most of them just don't want to come forward and talk about it. But I'm thinking that's slowly changing over the years, much more now than it did in the 70s, 60s, 70s, even the 80s. You had and same thing with journalists. You had, I think you're going to have somebody on later in one of your future shows about the Withville, Virginia sightings in the late '80s, where they had that whole wave of sightings down there. And
Sean's going to be on. Yes.
Named, Yeah, Sean Kotz, who's a great guy, but he got to talk to Danny Gordon, who was a journalist like me, former newspaper guy. And I also used to work in radio, too, and Danny was working in radio at that time, and he was right on the fringe of that, getting reports from the local law enforcement and people that were seeing all those UFOs during that time down there in Withville, Virginia, which is a part of the Appalachian Mountains. That'll be really interesting when you get to talk about that, because they have a lot more information on that than I do.
Yeah, we have a call coming in. Hang on just a second.
Great.
Here. Trying to join it. Caller, welcome to the show. Your first name, where are you calling from?
My name's Kim. I'm calling from Alberta, Canada.
Well,
Hi,
welcome
Martin.
to the
How
show.
are you?
You have some snow
Glad
up
to hear your
there?
voice. Oh, it's been snowing up here like crazy in the last few days, but just cold.
Yeah.
Lots of cold. Yeah, time to stay in the house.
Yeah, right. Do you have
and look outside. I'm looking out right now at the sliver of the moon here. It's just kind of getting dark here, so yeah, we're kind of a little later in the day or whatever, earlier in the day than you guys, but
that's right.
All the same, it's you have a great show.
Well,
and everybody in the chat room there, I just want to say hi to everyone. And I wanted to there was a couple questions, Martin, that slipped by maybe. One of them being, one of them we were just talking about ball lightning. My grandmother, or my whatever, seen one go through her farmhouse. Always claimed it was ball lightning. I never even asked her ever if she thought it was a UFO or some other kind of intelligent thing, but definitely that countryside they're from is full of weird stories. But I was just wondering what Kyle thought of ball lightning.
That's one of those things that people have talked about, whether it's a UFO or it is something like ball lightning. You have a lot of people reporting orbs that are similar to that. And I guess it just depends on the different situation. You'd have to have a little more evidence or a little more information about each case and to try to determine. But like you said, your grandmother, if she saw something, she's not going to say she thought she saw a UFO. She's probably going to talk about it being something that she can explain. And I think a lot of times that's what people do. Oh, it was ball lightning, or it was a meteor, or some other something that they could explain that makes it easier for them to understand.
Absolutely, yeah. Some of that plasma discharge kind of phenomena that seems to take place in certain places like mountains, and I don't know if it's an electrical thing that's happening, that the planet itself is discharging some kind of photons, or you look at some of that stuff in Antarctica that's happening, and they say that some of these weird particles that are coming off of the planet that shouldn't really be happening, which is kind of another weird side story. But I just think the planet itself seems to have a phenomena to itself that maybe it's because of the electrical phenomena with being a huge, big motor itself creating this electrical phenomena that, if a person had never seen lightning before and all of a sudden it happened, honestly, we would be in a freaked out situation all around the planet wondering what was going on. But since it's just a natural occurrence, it's not really a big deal, except it's very exciting.
Something like 5 million strikes a day or something in lightning around the world. It's really crazy. But yeah, something like earthquake lights is another one. Another mystery.
Yeah. And around volcanoes.
Yeah, volcanoes.
You have those lights and the electrical discharges. And, you've had people talk about even different dimensions around these kind of places. There's certain areas that there's different magnetic fields, there's a whole different feel. It's amazing, and there's so much out there that we still don't know about.
Yeah, that electrical phenomena part is just definitely a different kind of thing, and nobody seems to really even be able to put a finger on understanding it. So anyway, Martin, it's really good to be able to call in. And people were bugging me to call in. There was a couple other questions. I think the 411 was kind of interested people because of where you're from, Kyle, with all the incidences of the missing people that kind of happen in those parts. But
Oh.
We have them too right in our city. I think Pilates there actually put our own city into it, being our river valley has had many cases of missing people and never to be seen again. And they were scouring our river a couple summers back when it got low, looking for bodies, which was really grim and kind of weird to watch. But there's been so many people that have gone missing, never to be found, and it's not like it's not like a big park or something. It's just a river valley with a river going through with a small river bank, kind of thing. So it's just kind of strange. I don't know. Anyways, Martin, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. Nice guest.
Hey,
great
thanks.
show.
All right.
Hi, everybody to chat.
All right.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, we have another caller that just called in. Caller, what's your name and where are you calling from?
This is Abner. I'm calling from Florida.
Hi there. Welcome to the show. What's your name again, please?
Abner?
Abner, welcome. You have a question for our guest?
Yes. I want to know for Mr. Lovern, at what point did he decide, or what inspired him to write books? I mean, he's in journalism. Usually journalism doesn't go the way of the UFO. Usually the opposite. What inspired him to, say, hey, this is what I'm going to cover. This is for real. This is what I got to do.
Yeah, that's it. Basically, I'd always thought that it would be great to be able to write a book, and I collected stories over the years. And like you say, you're a little leery about talking to certain people about it. But becoming friends with another journalist who was also a publisher, I've had a small publishing company. After talking to him and discussing the idea, I just took the leap. I thought, I don't care what people think. I'm going to write this. People need to know these stories, and it worked out for me. And like I said, the first book did so well that we published the second one, and now as we were just talking about, I've accumulated enough stories to do another book and hopefully get it published in the future. But I just felt like, I don't care what people think anymore. I don't, I'm sure there's still a few behind the scenes that want to snicker and say, that's crazy. I don't believe that stuff. But, I'm a believer, and I think people need to know the truth. And they, and I write the books from being a reporter. I don't talk about my personal sightings. I talk about the sightings that people have. I interview them like I'm interviewing them for a newspaper story, and that's how I write the books. And I let them tell the story, and I use quotes from them and the information that they give, or just from the research I do on others' past stories from years ago. So that's basically it.
All right, thank you.
All right, Abner. Hey, thanks
you.
for the call. All right, so going back to, we were talking about the different, light phenomena with the caller. Brown Mountain Lights, is that, I don't even know if that's part of Appalachia, is it?
Not familiar with that, so
okay.
maybe not.
Yeah.
But I saw a show on I think it was History Channel the other night, a series called Vanished, that talked about how many people do disappear every year, and there's certain areas in the United States that they had pinpointed, and one was along the Pacific area out there in the Sierra, the mountains. The one area was the Appalachian Mountains, the Appalachian Trail, as you talked about earlier. In other areas up around the Great Lakes, Canada, there were just certain areas where people do vanish, and they've never been heard from again. No signs. They've done, searches, and it makes you wonder. Were they abducted? Did they go into another dimension? It's really another whole interesting phenomena.
It really is. I had a conversation with David Pilates at the MUFON event last summer, and we talked for quite a while. He's a great guy, but he just wasn't interested. Hey, Abner, are you still on the line? Just heard extra noise. Sorry. Anyway, he wouldn't want to be on the show because it was has UFO in the title. And even though he thinks there's something to the UFO phenomena, he wasn't interested in being on the show. But of course, that is one of the theories people have actually called in when he's been on Coast to Coast or other shows and say, hey, what about, the abduction? Maybe these are people being abducted that just have not returned, and I have no idea. And the one thing he's very careful of, I don't know if you've heard him or listened to him or watched his movie or anything, but he's very careful not to say what he thinks is happening. He kind of lets it, be up to the person to interpret the way they want to. But he doesn't want to go out on any theory. He's just talking about it plain happening. And it really
that's
is
sort of
interesting.
how the angle that I take when I write my stories, I let the person tell their story, and I just write it as a journalist, basically, and let them share their story and then try to reflect how they felt at the time, and let them give me any details they could remember, and then just share it. And then it's up to the reader what they feel like and whether they believe it's true or not. And like I say, most of the people, I believe, everyone that I've written about or talked to, I believe. I think that they're legit, and something did happen. Now, there's cases where, there's UFOs that can be explained a lot of times.
Right.
But there are those cases that can't be, and that's the ones that are interesting. And so there's so many that have not been, And I wanted to mention this. I've got an Appalachian UFO Research Society Facebook page that myself and Thomas Junebug Fugit started. And since we started that, you'd be surprised. You need to go on there and check it out. We get reports all the time, UFO reports. People will send pictures, they'll send video, and some of them are pretty good. And we hear a lot of reports from different people. So it was basically a way to give people a chance to share their story, because, as you said earlier, a lot of people just don't know where to go to report. They don't know about MUFON or other reporting organizations. This was a way, and it's really taken off. And social media has really been helpful to let people get the word out there. And this page we started is really got some good reports and some good pictures on it.
When someone goes to that actual site, the Facebook site, and actually puts up a reporting, of course, it's their name on it. Are they like sharing that information, and they're not afraid to?
Yeah, most of them are sharing it, not afraid to. As I say, I think more people are coming forward now, and they're not as afraid to report as they were in the past. And I'm really pleased how it's taken off, and it's been about 2 years since we started it, how many reports and views we get and likes. It's amazing. Just check it out and you'll see. It goes back for a ways and gives people an outlet. And it don't have to be, it doesn't have to be Appalachian UFOs. It can be, from Florida or anywhere. We'd love to hear from them.
Can you, off the top, can you talk about any one that stands out right now, or am I putting too much pressure on you?
Well, I can't, off the top of my head, think of any, but there's been a few over the years and over the last few months. Seemed like there was some from down in the Carolinas and Virginia, just all across the East Coast. We get a lot from, even Alabama, all down through that area. It seemed like there's a lot from Carolinas, and they're just Tennessee. I'm just scrolling down here right now, looking at how many different places we're getting. Different states reports were Pennsylvania and other North Carolina. It's just amazing how many reports we get from off and down most of the East Coast and through the Appalachians.
Interesting. Wow. Any other stories come to mind in your any of your books that you think are pretty amazing stories?
Well, let me glance here real quick. I know we're running out of time, but see if I can come up with another.
Yeah, we got about about 7 minutes, something like that left. And I've always, I've hiked part of the Appalachian. I'm trying to say it like you, but I probably won't get it pronounced right.
Appalachian.
We just
You're
say,
okay.
up here in Maine, we call it, we have our own way of saying things. So
I gotcha. Same here. We've got our own accent and ways of saying things here too.
Yeah.
There's a couple of different cases I had that reports, which I think is very interesting. People talking about huge spaceships that they've seen, that they were so huge that they blocked out the stars. And of course, the thing that comes to my mind there is maybe a mothership. But there was one guy that he lived near a radio station. Actually, had a radio tower, and he said it was about 2:00 in the morning, and he hears all these dogs barking, and he's thinking, "Oh, is there a prowler?" And he says, "I get up and I go out and look," and he sees this huge UFO hovering over the neighborhood. He said it stretched out. It seemed like 300 yards. I guess the length of 3 football fields. And he said a light was emitting down, beaming over one certain house. And he said he looked up. It was a clear night. He said it was so big that it was blocking out the stars. You could look over one section of the stars and hear it. And I had a couple of sightings like that, and that just blows me away that there could be something that big. But again, how many people are out at 2:00 in the morning looking? He just happened to hear the dogs barking. He thought there was something prowler. He goes out and he sees that. And then after that, he had a couple other sightings. So it seems like once people see something, they're more alert and they're on the lookout, thinking they're going to see something again.
I was on a show with Mac Maloney. He does military UFOs, Military X-Files. That's the name of his show. And he says, I'm never going to see a UFO. He says he has a theory that, there's the dog again. You better go look outside.
He must hear an alien or UFO outside, yeah.
So he's saying that he has a theory that only some, a certain type of person will see a UFO. I don't know if I really buy that because, a lot of times people just all of a sudden have their first sighting out of nowhere. So, I don't know.
Again, I think a lot of people just don't pay attention. Some people aren't alert, but I think if it comes up and bites them in the rear, as they say, they're going to be able to. They're going to see it. But again, a lot of people just don't even think about looking up or looking for UFOs or even thinking about it. And I think a lot of people, if they do see something, they don't want to even talk about it or admit that they saw it. There are especially older folks, they just don't want to, like the guy called in earlier with his grandmother, if they see something, they don't want to talk about it because they don't want people to think they're, off the rocker or whatever. And again, it gets back to that old stereotype, and people that believe in UFOs just aren't really telling the truth,
I would think that if I was to put myself in the shoes of the guy that heard the dogs barking, went outside and saw that, I would wake up everyone I could think of to wake up to see something like that. I know.
You would think so. And then at the same time, I always ask people, I said, did you take a picture?
Yeah.
No, I didn't think about it. It's like they always just say like they're almost hypnotized or they're mesmerized that they're watching it so, and
I do
and they
understand.
Don't think about it.
I totally understand,
and I understand that.
Yeah. Because
today, though, most people have cameras on their phones and they can video. It's not like it was in the past when people just had film cameras and didn't even carry cameras. So it's a little easier now. So I'm going to tell people, hey, if you see something, if you think about it, take a picture, take some video, get some proof. And also, like you said, if there's somebody else close by, get them, wake them up, or get their attention. Hey, look, can you see this? Get another witness. Yeah. It lends credibility to what you are seeing. And I know what you're saying. I agree.
What was
I want everybody else to see it.
He had another sighting too. Can you recall what that was?
This one was he said he was just driving down the road and he was with some friends that left the movies and they had a object that flew right over top of their car, and he said it just sped by him. It was really low. It wasn't anything like his other sighting, but ever since then, he is a believer, and he's always on the lookout for, again, I guess once you see something, you're going to be more interested, and you're going to, and until he saw my book, he had never told anybody about his first sighting. But once he realized, hey, this guy believes, I feel comfortable talking to him and telling him about it. And there's always somebody out there that will want to hear your story. So if you're listening and you've seen something, don't be bashful. Don't be, afraid to talk to somebody or tell somebody. Especially, there's a lot of guys like us out there, you, me, and others, MUFON or other organizations that want to hear the story and maybe look into it. If it's a good enough story, they may want to investigate it and see how many other people have seen it. You'd be surprised. A lot of the stories that people have told me, when I would go back and look, there would be a story in the newspaper, even my little newspaper, long before I worked there. There had been some sightings in this area, and when I went back and into the old microfilms at the library, there was a story in the paper. They saw a UFO and talked about it. There'd be the same night. So there were several other people that saw it, and they didn't even realize it.
Amazing.
So that's, yeah, it is amazing when you think about it. So there's a lot of times, if you go back and look at some of the old archives, a lot of the newspapers, there actually have been some stories that may have been buried on page 3 or something, but it was in there, because I think there's always been a little bit of interest there from some of the journalists.
Doc on the chat room, he wanted to know if there are ever any earth sounds reported in Appalachia, people have been reporting these boom sounds and things like that. I don't know if you've heard about any of that.
I've heard a little bit about it. I've not personally had anybody tell me about any of those sounds, or there was one case somebody was telling me about that they felt like they kept hearing like a drilling sound that was coming from beneath the earth in the community where they lived. But, that's the only thing that close to anything like that I've heard about. But I've heard of those in other places, but nothing that I've investigated or dealt with.
Well, a drilling sound is pretty darn weird.
Yeah, it is.
Make me a little nervous.
I just wish there would have been more people. Yeah. It's like, okay, what do we got?
Yeah. Well, interesting stuff. So we have just about 4 minutes left here. And so I just wanted to ask if you have just one more particular case you can, and then to wrap up the show that you can think of.
Okay, let me look real quick here. Try to come up with another.
And you mentioned, now you've mentioned 2 triangles. Is that, are there a lot of triangles in these stories, or is that?
Seems like you said, more of the later stories, people are seeing triangular-shaped UFOs rather than disc-shaped UFOs. Here's a really interesting story, and it's actually happened in Michigan, which is not in Appalachia, but the people that I talked to, and a really nice couple, Tom and Thelma Jackson, they had grown up here in southern West Virginia, but had moved to Michigan to get work, which a lot of people did back in the 50s and 60s. They moved to the Rust Belt, as they call it, to work in the automotive factory or wherever, and up in that area, Detroit and Columbus, those areas. But she was to tell me a story about, as we were talking about snow earlier, that one night it was snowing and they had called off school. So her son asked if he could go outside and play in the snow with a couple of the neighbor kids, and she reluctantly told him he could. And as they were out there, they were building like a fort, and all of a sudden they look up and there's this huge UFO over top of them, and it shined a light down on her son. And he comes in the house and he tells his mom about it, and they go out and they don't see anything, but he even tells her, he says, "Mom, do you think I'm going to get sick, or since it shined that light on me?" And she says, "What are you talking about?" He was only 11 years old at the time. Well, it wasn't very long after that he was diagnosed with a brain tumor.
Oh my God!
And he eventually passed. I know, and he eventually passed away. It's a really sad story.
Wow.
And she really felt that there was a connection between his UFO sighting and her son getting sick and passing away. And it makes me tear up now, even to this day, talking about it. And when I talk to her about it, it's it was just a sad story. But it makes you wonder if there was some kind of connection, or maybe some kind of radiation, or whatever. There's been cases like that's happened in the past too. Again, people say there's no evidence, but you've had places where there is crop circles or something looks like it's landed, or the soil's disturbed, or even they've detected radiation. So there has been evidence, but no one necessarily wants to come forward, at least from a government agency, and says, "Hey, yeah, this is true. This happened."
Right. One thing, we just have a minute or so here. One thing I've noticed, you said many times in these sightings, is that the object shined a light down. You've said that now at least 4 times, I believe.
Yeah, I've had several times people, that a light was beamed down toward the ground, toward a home, even in this case toward this young man. It makes you wonder if they're doing some kind of scan, or I always said when we go out into the jungle or wherever, Appalachia, we take soil samples, or we are studying the animals, if you're a scientist or whatever, and I always feel like they're doing the same thing. If it's aliens that are coming down, they're checking us out. That's why people probably are abducted. That's why they're taking soil samples, or plant samples, or water samples. A lot of other UFOs have been seen over water. I've had a couple of cases where they've been hovering over water, and so there's a reason for it.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say, though, we're out of time. Just real quick, do you have a way someone can reach you real easy?
Facebook's the best way.
Okay.
This Appalachian UFO Research Society, they can leave a message there.
Excellent.
And,
all right.
On the Facebook page, and we'll get back with them.
All right. Kyle, thanks so much.
Glad to be on here. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care. All right, everyone. So that's it for our show. Thank you so much, and I want to thank everyone that helps out with the show. We are plumb out of time. We'll be back with a repeat guest next week, Peter Robbins. And remember, everyone, to keep your eyes to the sky.